A few months ago, I made a decision that felt like cutting the last thread, tying me to a life I no longer recognized. I sold my apartment, packed what little I cared about into my truck, and drove north until the roads thinned and the noise disappeared. I told myself I wanted silence, clean air, and distance from everything that had been eating away at me for years. But the truth was simpler and harder. I wanted to stop feeling like something was watching me, even when I was completely alone, every night, without any clear reason at all. At first, Alaska felt like the cure I had been searching for, the kind of place people imagine when they say they want to disappear. Endless forests, mountains that looked like they had never been touched by human hands, and a kind of silence so complete it almost pressed against your ears. I found a small cabin miles from the nearest town. No neighbors, no cell service, no distractions, just wood smoke, cold air, and time. It was perfect, or at least, it should have been. I remember standing outside the first night staring up at the sky, watching the northern lights ripple like something alive, and thinking whatever was wrong with me would finally stay behind. The first few days passed quietly. I fell into a simple rhythm, waking with the light, chopping wood, checking traps, cooking basic meals, and sitting for hours, doing nothing at all, just breathing and listening to the wind move through the trees. It felt like I had stepped out of time itself, like the world I came from had been sealed off behind me. And for a while, I slept better than I had in years. No dreams, no interruptions, just deep, heavy silence that wrapped around me like a blanket. But even then, there were moments, small ones that didn't quite fit. It started with sounds, barely noticeable at first, a soft crunch outside late at night, like footsteps pressing into snow. I told myself it was animals, deer maybe, or something smaller, moving through the trees. But the sounds didn't move like animals. They would stop suddenly, linger too long, and then continue in a way that felt deliberate, measured, as if whatever was out there knew exactly where I was and was choosing how close to come. I tried to ignore it. I had come here to get away from paranoia, not feed it. Then came the feeling, the one I had hoped to escape completely. It would hit me without warning, usually after dark, when the fire burned low and the cabin settled into that deep, creaking quiet. I would be sitting there doing nothing, and suddenly I would feel it, unmistakable and heavy, the sense that I was not alone, not in a house. Vague, anxious way, but in a precise, undeniable certainty, like someone standing just outside my field of vision, watching, waiting, and not bothering to hide it. The first time I checked, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside into the cold. The air hit me like a wall, sharp and clean. The snow stretched out untouched, glowing faintly under the moonlight. There was nothing, no movement, no tracks, no sound except the distant whisper of wind through the trees. I walked a slow circle around the cabin, scanning the darkness, telling myself I was being ridiculous, that this was exactly the kind of thinking I had come here to escape. Eventually, I went back inside, locked the door, and laughed it off. But it didn't stop. The next night it happened again. The same feeling, the same quiet pressure building at the back of my mind, until I couldn't ignore it. I checked again. This time I was more careful. I moved slower, kept the light low, listened before stepping out, and that's when I noticed something that hadn't been there before. A single set of footprints in the snow, leading from the tree line to within a few feet of my cabin, and then stopping completely, as if whoever made them had simply vanished. I stood there longer than I should have, staring at those prints, trying to make sense of them. They were too large to be anything but human, and too deliberate to be random. They came straight toward the cabin, no wandering, no hesitation, just a direct path, and then nothing. No return tracks, no sign of where they went next. I felt that same cold certainty settle into my chest again, stronger this time, heavier like a weight pressing down on me. And for the first time since arriving, I felt something close to fear. I went back inside and locked every door and window, even though I knew how pointless that was out here. If someone wanted to get in, they would get in easily. The cabin wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep the cold away. I sat by the fire, gripping the flashlight like it was some kind of weapon, listening for any sound that didn't belong. Every creak, every shift of wood, every faint noise outside felt amplified, stretched thin until it was almost unbearable. And still, nothing happened. Hours passed like that, before exhaustion finally pulled me under. But even as I drifted off, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had stood outside my cabin that night hadn't left, that it was still out there somewhere, just beyond the reach of the firelight, waiting and watching and learning. And for the first time since I came to Alaska, I realized something I had been trying not to admit. Leaving everything behind hadn't solved anything. It had only made whatever was wrong with me impossible to escape. I didn't sleep much after that. Even when my body shut down, my mind stayed half awake, hovering just below the surface. Every small sound dragging me back up, like I was drowning in something I couldn't see. When morning finally came, it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a pause, like whatever had been out there was simply waiting for the dark to return. I stepped outside as soon as there was enough light to see clearly, half expecting the footprints to be gone, but they were still there, sharp and defined exactly as I had seen them the night before. I followed them this time, moving slowly, keeping my eyes on the ground, as if looking up might reveal something I wasn't ready to see. The prints led straight to the cabin, just like I remembered, and stopped just a few feet from the wall. I stood there again, tracing their path, trying to find anything I might have missed, a second set of tracks, a disturbance in the snow, anything that would explain how they ended so abruptly. But there was nothing. It was as if the person had walked out of the forest toward my home and then simply ceased to exist. I told myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the wind had covered the return tracks, or the snow had fallen unevenly during the night. But even as I thought it, I knew it wasn't true. The surface was too clean, too untouched. There were no signs of drift or disturbance beyond those single deliberate steps leading toward me and stopping, like a sentence cut off in the middle of a word. That day I kept busy on purpose. I chopped more wood than I needed, checked the perimeter of the cabin twice, and even walked further out into the trees than I had before, trying to map the area in my head. Anything to keep from thinking too much about what I had seen. But the deeper I went into the forest, the stronger that feeling became. The same quiet awareness pressing against my thoughts, like something just out of sight, keeping pace with me no matter which direction I turned. Once I stopped suddenly just to test it. I held my breath and listened. The forest went still in a way that didn't feel natural. Even the wind seemed to pull back for a moment. And in that silence, I thought I heard it. A faint shift behind me, not a full step, not a clear sound, just enough to make my chest tighten. I turned quickly, scanning the trees expecting to catch movement, but there was nothing. Only endless lines of dark trunks stretching in every direction. I went back to the cabin earlier than I had planned that evening, locking the door before the sun had fully set, which felt ridiculous and necessary at the same time. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that isolation was playing tricks on me, that anyone would start imagining things after being alone this long. But that explanation didn't sit right. The feeling I had wasn't vague or dreamlike. It was precise. It had weight to it, like a fact I hadn't proven yet, but already knew was true. Night came faster than I expected out there. It always did. One moment the sky would be dim and gray, and the next it would drop into complete darkness, as if someone had flipped a switch. I lit a few extra lamps and kept the fire going stronger than usual. The cabin filled with that warm flickering light, pushing back the shadows, but not completely. There were still corners where the darkness held on thick and unmoving. I tried to distract myself with a book, but I kept reading the same lines over and over without absorbing anything. My attention kept drifting back to the windows, to the door, to the quiet space just beyond the walls, where anything could be standing at any moment, watching without making a sound. I told myself I wouldn't check again, that I would stay inside no matter what. But that promise didn't last long. It started again around the same time as the night before. That subtle shift in the air, that almost imperceptible change that told me something was different. Before I could even explain how I knew, I felt it. Before I heard anything, before I saw anything. Just that sudden certainty settling into place like a missing piece, clicking in my mind. Then the sound came. A single step outside, soft but unmistakable, followed by another, and then silence. I froze where I was, every muscle in my body tightening as I listened, waiting for it to continue, but it didn't. Whoever or whatever was out there had stopped again, just like before. Close enough that I could almost picture where they were standing. Just beyond the wall, near the same spot where the footprints had ended. I don't know how long I stood there like that. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt strange in that moment, stretched thin and unstable. I moved slowly toward the window, keeping my breathing shallow, trying not to make any unnecessary noise, even though some part of me knew it wouldn't matter if something was really out there. I was inside. I reached the edge of the window and hesitated, just for a second longer than I should have. Then I leaned slightly to the side, just enough to look out into the darkness. And for a moment, I saw nothing. Just the faint outline of snow, reflecting what little light escaped from the cabin. And then I saw it. Not a full figure, not clearly defined, but something darker than the night itself, standing between the trees, completely still, as if it had been waiting for me to look. The shape didn't move, it didn't react. It just stood there, watching. And even though I couldn't make out details, I knew without question that it was facing me. That whatever it was had been looking at the cabin the entire time, and had only stopped because it knew I was finally paying attention. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might tear through my chest. Every instinct telling me to run, even though there was nowhere to go. I grabbed the rifle from beside the door, more for the feeling of control than any real plan, and stood there, listening again. But the sound didn't come back. There were no footsteps, no movement, no sign that anything had ever been there at all. But I knew what I had seen, and more importantly, I knew what I had felt. This wasn't just in my head anymore. Something had followed me out here. Something that didn't belong to the forest, and didn't behave like anything I understood. And as the fire cracked softly behind me, and the darkness pressed against the windows, I realized the worst part wasn't that it was watching me. It was that it had waited until I noticed. I didn't look out the window again that night. Not because I thought it would be gone, but because I knew it wouldn't be there in any way I could understand. Whatever I had seen between the trees hadn't moved like something physical. It hadn't shifted or reacted when I spotted it. It had simply existed there, as if it had always been there, and I had only just become aware of it. That realization sat heavy in my chest, long after I stepped back from the glass. I kept the rifle close, and every light in the cabin on, even the ones I never used. The place felt smaller somehow, like the walls had drawn in around me. The warm glow that had felt comforting before now seemed thin and fragile, barely holding back the dark, pressing in from every direction. I tried to tell myself I was still in control, that this was my space, but the thought rang hollow the moment it formed. At some point, exhaustion pulled me down again, but sleep didn't come cleanly. It came in fragments, shallow and broken, filled with images that didn't quite make sense. I remember standing outside the cabin in the dream, staring at the same line of trees where I had seen the figure. Except this time I knew it was closer. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it just behind me, breathing slowly, like it was studying the rhythm of my body, learning it, memorizing it. When I woke up, it was still dark. The fire had burned low, and the air inside the cabin had grown cold enough that I could see my breath. For a second I didn't move. I just lay there, listening, trying to separate the fading pieces of the dream from whatever was real. That was when I heard it. Not outside this time, but inside the cabin. A soft, uneven sound, like something shifting its weight across the wooden floor. Every part of me went still, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing, because it didn't fit into anything that made sense. I had locked the doors, checked the windows. There was no way anything could be inside with me. And yet the sound came again, closer this time. A faint dragging step, followed by a pause, as if whatever it was needed a moment before moving again. I sat up slowly, gripping the rifle so tightly my hands began to ache, my eyes scanning the dim interior of the cabin, trying to force shapes out of the shadows. But everything looked normal. The table, the chairs, the stove, nothing out of place, nothing moving. And then I realized the sound wasn't coming from the open space of the room. It was coming from behind me. I turned carefully, each movement deliberate, as if going too fast might trigger something I couldn't stop. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, landing on the far wall, and then sliding across the floor until it reached the space beside the bed. For a second there was nothing, just empty wood and shadow. And then the light caught on something that made my breath catch in my throat. There were marks on the floor. Thin, shallow grooves, running parallel to each other, like something had been dragged across the wood over and over again. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. I would have noticed. They led from the far corner of the room, all the way to the side of my bed. It stopped just inches from where I had been lying. A cold realization settled over me as I stared at those marks. Whatever had made them hadn't just entered the cabin. It had come close, very close, close enough that if I had rolled over in my sleep, I might have touched it without even knowing. The thought made my stomach turn, and for a moment, I couldn't move at all. Then something shifted in the corner of the room, just at the edge of the flashlight beam. Not a full movement, not something I could clearly define, but enough to break whatever paralysis had taken hold of me. I swung the light toward it, instantly my finger tightening on the trigger, but there was nothing there again, just empty space and shadow, exactly as it had been before. The silence that followed felt heavier than any sound I had heard. It pressed in on me, thick and suffocating, making it hard to think clearly. I forced myself to stand, to check every inch of the cabin again, even though I already knew what I would find. Nothing. No open doors, no broken windows, no sign of forced entry, just those marks on the floor, and the memory of that sound moving closer in the dark. I didn't sit back down after that. I stayed on my feet, pacing slowly, keeping the rifle raised, as if that would make any difference, as if whatever this was could be stopped by something as simple as a weapon. The hours dragged on, stretching into something that felt endless, until finally the faint gray light of morning began to seep through the windows. When the sun rose, I opened the door, carefully, half expecting to see the same footprints waiting for me again. But the snow outside was untouched, smooth and unbroken, as if the night had never happened at all. I stepped out slowly, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing. No figure, no movement, no sign that anything had been watching me. Just the same quiet forest I had chosen to isolate myself in. I should have left then. I think about that now more than anything else. I should have packed what I could and driven until I found people, until I found noise, until I found anything that felt normal again. But I didn't, and the reason is hard to explain. It wasn't curiosity, not exactly, and it wasn't denial either. It was something deeper, something that had been building since the first night. A growing certainty that whatever was happening wasn't random, and that leaving wouldn't end it. Because the truth had started to take shape in my mind, slow and unsettling. The feeling I had tried to escape before coming here, the sense of being watched. It hadn't started in Alaska, it had followed me here. And now, it had become something more defined, more deliberate, like it had been waiting for me to isolate myself before revealing itself completely. I stood there in the cold morning air, staring out at the empty forest, and for the first time I stopped asking what it was, and started asking something far worse, why it had chosen me. I didn't go back inside right away. I stood there longer than I should have, letting the cold bite through my clothes, because it felt better than the alternative. The idea of stepping back into that cabin, knowing something had been inside with me during the night, was enough to make my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. But eventually, the cold forced me to move. I couldn't stay out there forever, and pretending the problem was outside wouldn't change what I already knew. When I stepped back in, the first thing I did was look at the floor again. The marks were still there, exactly where I had seen them, thin dragging lines that ended beside the bed, like something had stopped just short of reaching me. I crouched down, running my fingers lightly over the grooves. They were real, not cracks, not imperfections in the wood. Something had made them recently, and with intention. I checked everything again more thoroughly this time. Every corner, every cabinet, every space where something could hide, even though I already knew I wouldn't find anything. And I didn't. The cabin was empty, in the way it had always been empty, and yet it didn't feel that way anymore. It felt occupied, like walking into a room where someone had just been standing, seconds before you arrived. By the time night came again, I had made a decision. For it to happen. I wasn't going to sit there pretending I had no control if something was coming into that cabin every night. Then I was going to be ready for it. I set up a chair facing the bed, kept the rifle across my lap, and turned off all the lights except one dim lamp near the corner. Enough to see, but not enough to blind myself to movement. Hours passed slowly, the kind of slow that makes every minute feel stretched and deliberate. I focused on staying awake, on keeping my breathing steady, on not letting my mind drift into the same spiral of thoughts that had taken over the night before. At some point, the fire burned low, and the temperature dropped again. The same conditions, the same silence, everything aligning in a way that felt intentional. Then it started, not with a sound, but with that feeling, the same unmistakable shift, like something entering the space without needing a door or a window. My grip tightened on the rifle as I scanned the room, forcing myself not to panic, because panic would make me miss it, and I knew now that whatever this was didn't move in ways I expected. The first sound came a moment later, a soft dragging step from the far side of the room, exactly where I had seen the marks begin. I didn't move. I didn't raise the rifle. I just watched as the sound came again, closer this time, followed by another and another, each one uneven, like something struggling to move correctly. And then I saw it, not all at once, but in pieces, the way your eyes adjust to darkness, shapes forming where there shouldn't be any. A distortion in the air that slowly took on something resembling a figure, tall but hunched, its limbs too long, its posture wrong, in a way that made it hard to focus on directly. Like my mind kept trying to reject what it was seeing. It moved forward with that same dragging motion, until it reached the side of the bed and stopped exactly where the marks ended, its head tilted slightly, as if it were looking at me, though I couldn't make out a face, only a suggestion of one, something hollow and sunken where features should have been. For a moment, neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy, and then something shifted in my understanding. Not a sound, not a gesture, but a realization that came from somewhere deeper than thought. This thing wasn't here to harm me. It had been close enough the night before. It could have done anything it wanted, and it hadn't. My hands suddenly felt useless. I lowered it slowly, my eyes never leaving the figure as it remained there, watching or waiting. I couldn't tell which. And then without thinking, I spoke the words, coming out quieter than I expected. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond, at least not in any way I could hear. But the moment the question left my mouth, the air in the room seemed to change again. Heavier, sharper, like something had just shifted direction. And then I felt it. Not from the figure in front of me, but from somewhere else. Something outside the cabin. Something much farther away, and yet somehow connected. Images flashed through my mind, too quickly to fully grasp. Glimpses of the forest, the snow disturbed in places I had never walked, dark shapes beneath the surface of the ground, things hidden, buried deliberately, and then a final impression, so clear it made my stomach drop. The sense of being watched, not by the thing in front of me, but by something else, something human. My head snapped toward the window, instinct taking over as I stood up too fast, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I moved to the glass, scanning the tree line, and this time I saw it clearly. A figure standing at the edge of the forest, partially concealed, but not enough to hide what it was. A person, tall, still watching the cabin, just as I had imagined before. I turned back toward the room, but the thing beside the bed was gone. The space empty, as if it had never been there at all, except for the marks on the floor, and the echo of that understanding, still lingering in my mind. It hadn't been watching me, it had been trying to show me something. Outside, the figure didn't move, it just stood there, and in that moment, everything aligned in a way that made my chest tighten with a different kind of fear. The kind that comes from clarity, not confusion. Whatever had followed me here, whatever had been inside my cabin, it wasn't the threat, it was a warning. And the thing it was warning me about was already here.